being a scientist is one of the most enjoyable ways of doing what you like. That conceptual framework, you hope that a teaching program over time transmits it. Later I have realized that it's called a central science.
Welcome to Scientifically Yours, a program on Indian women scientists who have made significant contributions in the areas of science and technology, both nationally and internationally. Today we have with us such a remarkable scientist, Dr. Charu Sita Chakravarti, a physical chemist working in IIT Delhi. You have been working on water for last several years, for over a decade. Could you tell us that how much really do we know about water?
Yeah, let me try to explain. My interest as a physical chemist is really in liquids as a phase of matter. And I'll go back to things that many people remember from school. We all learn about the three phases of matter: solids, liquids and gases. And water is the most familiar liquid. One of the reasons for being interested in water is, of course, it's very familiar. We know a lot about it, but it's a very good example of substance that plays such an overarching role in so many aspects that we in fact need to understand it very well to be able to model and understand both biological processes as well as many other aspects of industrial, chemical as well as environment related processes. So if you think about it, I start from the basic sciences end, but I will try to explain to you why this is a substance which illustrates very well the links between basic science and applied science. So when we think about chemistry, most of us remember these pictures, ball and stick models of atoms and molecules, including the triatomic water molecule and so on. We also remember, at least I think many people remember, Avogadro's number, that it is 10 to the power of 23 atoms. Anything that we call macroscopic, that means anything on which we can make measurements, is typically always contains Avogadro's number or higher. When we are doing chemistry, we are always taught to think in terms of 2 or 3 atoms, we are going to change them, maybe 100 atoms, maybe if it's a large protein, 20,000 atoms. But it's much, much less than 10 to the power 23. So we are trying to predict the behavior of an aggregate on the basis of the behavior of individual entities. So it's like trying to predict how the whole country is going to vote based on responses of individuals. There is going to be an averaging process. The conceptual basis of this comes from something called statistical mechanics. In physical chemistry, we are trying to take ideas of physics and translate them or apply them to atomic or molecular systems.
So what are the experiments that you have done on the water?
I am myself not so much an experimentalist, but what I do is something that's called a numerical experiment or computer simulations. Some of you may have noticed that in fact this year's Nobel Prize is for Martin Karplus, somebody who developed much of what we know as simulation methodology for biological and chemical systems, one of the people. So what I am interested in doing is creating models so that systems that are too complex, for example proteins in an aqueous solution or even simple liquids or chemicals, we are able to create snapshots or trajectories which are essentially, if you had a fine enough camera, this is what you would see. But we are able to do something more important. We are able to do the aggregating process so that we can compare the results of these simulations to experiments. Now what makes water interesting? What makes it interesting is a number of things, some of which any snapshot of the earth will show you. Most liquids have a solid phase which is heavier than the liquid phase. Water is one case where you find that the polar ice cap is visible. The fact that it is liquid, it's a very light molecule. Other light molecules of the same molecular weight like methane, etc., are gaseous under terrestrial conditions. Water is a liquid, it covers the 70% of the earth's surface. It shapes all the life that we know, even though actually by weight it is less than 1% of the earth's weight, but the important part, the surface part, is 70% of it is covered with water. It holds heat very well. Our entire climate, including what we learn about land and sea breezes or the monsoons, is determined by the fact that water holds heat so well, technically it has a high heat capacity, that it acts as a thermal reservoir. So, all the ocean currents and so on that we know are created because of this kind of difference in the heat capacity of land and water. So, these are some of the unusual features of water, and then when we come to a living organism, then the water creates the microenvironment of the cell. So, in the microenvironment, for example, if you take a protein molecule like hemoglobin that carries oxygen in your blood, the hemoglobin molecule, to perform its function, it has a very, very large number of atoms. I forget the exact number, but tens of thousands of atoms. It will not, if it cannot hold its three-dimensional shape, it cannot carry oxygen. It will not hold. If you change the aqueous environment, if you replace water, or if you change the character of water by dissolving a little salt or dissolving a little alcohol, the hemoglobin molecule will not hold its shape. If you change one amino acid, and there are hundreds of amino acids, if a genetic mutation changes it, you get diseases. You get diseases like thalassemia, etc.
And another thing is that hydration is a fundamental process in chemical and biological system. Would you like to throw some light on that?
Hydration is really the dissolution of a substance in an aqueous environment, and for biological systems this is very important in determining their structure and function. And in fact, because water is so readily available, a lot of chemical and process technology also uses water as a solvent medium, and we need to understand it well.
Okay.
Right? For one example, of course, is, for example, drugs. You know, many drugs have to be stable in an aqueous environment. So, to ensure that they are stable and yet they are able to penetrate the cell membrane, which is actually hydrophobic, requires an understanding of hydration effects.
Both the chemical and the biological processes. We'll take a short break now. We'll right away come after the break. Be with us.
कैसे हुआ आसमां नीला,
पानी को कौन करता गीला,
ये धरती क्यों है गोल, हमारे जीवन में सूरज का क्या है रोल,
हवाई जहाज हवा में कैसे उड़ जाता,
पूरी को कौन है भुलाता,
कौन भरता इंटरनेट में इंफॉर्मेशन,
क्या कभी हवा भी होगी रेशन।
सोचोगे नहीं तो पता कैसे चलेगा? विज्ञान प्रसार, ताकि हर निर्णय ज्ञान आधारित हो। विज्ञान प्रसार, 850 Institutional Area, Sector 62, Noida. Email info@vigyanprasar.gov.in. Website www.vigyanprasar.gov.in.
Welcome back to Scientifically Yours. We are talking with Dr. Charusita Chakravarti. Ma'am, coming back to your discussions on the basically the aqueous solution of water, the anomalous properties of water that you have worked on, that which you have been telling, what are the other scientific research and the other aspects that you would like to tell our viewers?
Well, one thing that may be of more interest to a general audience is the idea of self-assembly. You know, nature creates very complicated structures, but there is nobody who sits and manufactures it on a production line. So what nature has learned to do is to create a set of components which, given the right environments, will self-assemble to create complicated proteins or DNA or whole cells or organisms, right? I am interested, of course, at the molecular level. Today we are beginning to imitate nature in trying to use self-assembly to create arrays of molecules as well as nanoscale objects like nanoparticles, because you need them for various functional applications. We hear a lot about nanotechnology and nanoparticles. To use them, we need to assemble them into ordered structures, and this is done through a process of self-assembly.
Your father has been a motivator, I mean, who has really helped you in taking the interest in academics. So I'm sure there would be many others who were around you, the teachers, the people who surrounded you, who have generated the curiosity in science. Could you please tell us something about your childhood memories and how your interest in science grew up, and especially in chemistry, how your interest developed in chemistry?
I think that, you know, I think like most children, I was actually quite curious, and I also used to like to read a lot, and I think that my interests were actually not that focused on science. I was interested in many things, and the advantage of an academic background was there were books of many kinds, whether on history or science and so on. I think I got more interested in science, and I mean, where I remember my father was that it wasn't so much that he taught me or he encouraged me to do academics in particular, but he himself had a lot of curiosity about many things. So he was always happy to see me interested in something, and he would encourage it. I think it got focused more on science because of two people specifically. One was a very good science teacher in primary school, and I remember that, I mean, she didn't do very fancy experiments, but whatever she did with great care. I still remember her experiments demonstrating the candle consuming 1/5 of the oxygen. I can still see the beaker
fascinating
and, and so on, because she would do them and they would work. So the concepts would get through. And she would also encourage us to read beyond what was done in class and so on. And I think the other was that we had neighbors who were botanists. In fact, our neighbor was Professor Satish and Nirmala Maheshwari. They were both quite well-known botanists. And Mrs. Maheshwari taught me to identify a lot of wild plants and so on, and they always had books which related to science. I remember visiting their lab. They had wonderful microscopes, much better than school microscopes. And
but so your interest didn't grow in botany, but you moved
I mean,
to
I think
chemistry.
I was just interested in science. And at some point I realized that I liked maths, physics, chemistry and biology, and I thought that chemistry was the one subject which later I have realized that it's called a central science or whatever, because it relates to many other scientific disciplines.
You said central science. Actually, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is, one thinks of physics as a fundamental science because it provides you the conceptual basis for understanding the world. I think of chemistry as a central science because it allows you to translate many of the ideas of physics to other domains of science.
You went abroad and you did your PhD. So how do you manage the balance between the research and teaching in a premier institution like IIT Delhi?
The honest answer would be that I struggle, but I think that where research and teaching are concerned, they are actually complementary activities, and it's a great pity, in fact, that in our country there are not that many environments which are the equivalent of research universities, where you can do both teaching and research. And I think that IITs do in fact offer an environment where it is possible to do both. And I do enjoy in fact doing both. And as a student, I must say that I found it very refreshing in Cambridge that the people who were actually actively engaged in research were also the ones often doing very basic teaching. So for me, especially I think in the basic sciences, it's very important to teach, because even if your students later on do something very different, that conceptual framework, you hope that a teaching program over time transmits it. And I like being part of that process.
The fundamentals of science is also get taught.
Well integrated into the curriculum, only if those who work with the fundamentals are also those who are engaged in pedagogy.
You were born in USA and you took a very strong decision of giving up your US citizenship and continued to stay in India, took up Indian citizenship. I mean, what motivated you, what inspired you to continue your career in scientific research in India, leaving the Western world or the universities?
Well, actually, I think in a sense, this is where a certain kind of family background matters. I never thought of myself as American. I came back to India at the age of 3 months or 6 months with my parents. And for my parents, India was their home. You know, it was not something, they were not bringing up a child to live in America. And so when the decision was made in my early 20s, long before I had a job or anything, or well before I had a job, and I think it was just that I felt that in the long run, I wanted to live and work in India. It is not that I did not care about my science, but I did not think that if the only way to grow, I did not think actually that professionally the only way to grow was to remain in the US or Europe. I felt that I could and I would want to try to do both in India.
India, okay. We'll take a short break now. We'll right away come after the break. Be with us.
कैसे हुआ आसमान नीला,
पानी को कौन करता गीला,
ये धरती क्यों है गोल, हमारे जीवन में सूरज का क्या है रोल,
हवाई जहाज हवा में कैसे उड़ जाता,
पूरी को कौन है बुलाता,
कौन भरता इंटरनेट में इंफॉर्मेशन,
क्या कभी हवा भी होगी रेशन,
सोचोगे नहीं तो पता कैसे चलेगा? विज्ञान प्रसार, ताकि हर निर्णय ज्ञान आधारित हो। विज्ञान प्रसार A50 Institutional Area Sector 62 Noida. Email info@vigyanprasar.gov.in. Website www.vigyanprasar.gov.in.
Let scientific temper be the basis for building nation.
Welcome back to Scientifically Yours. Today we have with us Dr. Charusita Chakravarti, physical chemist from IIT Delhi. Ma'am, we as women, being a woman, we have encountered, many a times we encounter a lot of social and professional challenges, the challenges in our social and professional life. What is your views regarding that?
So I think that, you know, the issue of women in science is something that attracts a lot of attention these days, partly because it's clear that as far as leadership roles or even roles higher in the academic and scientific hierarchies are concerned, there's very clearly an absence of numerical representation. Some of these are general issues of gender. I mean, most women, regardless of the nature of their work or their class, have a different problem of managing the work-life balance than men do. You know, I would not necessarily say that men do not have this problem, but women have it in a different form because of social expectations, because of the fact that the years in the childbearing years typically coincide with the years when your professional career is supposed to take off and so on. So in that sense, there are some general issues of why these glass ceilings operate, and I think those are well known to some extent. And I think that ensuring environments which are family friendly, so to speak, is a necessary problem for a society to solve.
Do we see such kind of gender differences in Western science also in the West?
About 15 years ago, the journal Science from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, they had an interesting countrywide surveys, and they showed that the US and Germany were among the women most unfriendly.
Okay.
Right? Partly because the professional styles were very, very demanding of a certain kind of work ethos, and the fact that it was very important to be seen completely on the job all the time, and partly because of the absence of state support for childcare, maternity leave, and many other aspects. France and Italy are among the better ones. Countries like India are somewhere in between. We may not have a lot of state support, but we have a lot of family and extended networks which can
Lot of
work
social-
positively. Sometimes they work very negatively and they can be reinforce a lot of conservative values. But when they work well, they do enable women to play multiple roles.
Like you mentioned, it's true that we don't find a lot of women in leadership positions or in decision-making positions. How could we really improve upon that? I mean, what should be the ways to bring in more women up to that stage, at that level?
I think that very rigorous recipes are not the best way to go, but I think it's important where science is concerned to or technology is concerned to understand how science works.
Okay.
And a very important part of the way scientific work is done is validation by the peer group. It is very important for the scientific community to accept ideas, to test them, and to validate them.
And also about the peer validation, which is also important in this matter.
Yeah, the peer validation is really intrinsic to the scientific process. I mean, every time you write a scientific paper, you are told that you must write it in a way that everything in it is reproducible. If other groups are not able to reproduce your calculations or not able to reproduce your experiments, that work has no value, right? If you are somehow not able to integrate within that scientific community very effectively, then you will not be able to get your ideas, you will not be able to generate ideas as effectively, and you will not be able to transmit them as effectively. And therefore, your impact will automatically be less. You will also play less of a leadership role because you are not seen to be as effective. So I believe that there are a number of things that can be done. One is, of course, things which should be done in order to, in general, improve work-life balance in any institution. The availability of a certain amount of childcare and understanding of flexible timings. But I think it's also important for the community to be sensitive to what are the core values, professional values, what is the important nature of work, and to try to be consciously inclusive.
So it's important to have a right kind of attitude and change in mindset also.
And it's also important to recognize, there are many scientists who will tell you that, okay, I mean, if it is good for us to include women because it indicates we are more fair, right? But how does science change because you include women? But I do believe that actually social diversity has a positive effect on academic communities or any other kind of community because it increases the number of different styles and ways of doing science. It increases the number and the kinds of questions we ask, and it brings in multiple points.
How do you see the future of science, particularly in India?
Well, I think there is a very positive aspect because if you really look at our per capita income as a country, we really, even within the other developing countries which have comparable scientific institutions, which is Argentina, Brazil or China, our per capita income is almost an order of magnitude less. So something in our culture and our institutions clearly allows us to perform better, but it clearly is not enough. One is, of course, every scientist will tell you inadequate money. But I don't think that's the only reason. I think it is also creating the right kind of institutions to foster science. And I think that a better understanding, if we look at the institutions which work in the areas of science and technology, I think they're basically of three kinds. One are academic institutions, which in some sense the mandate is education, training the next generation, in a sense transmitting and creating new knowledge. Then you have the more targeted R&D activities of either government or industrial labs. The private R&D in India is very limited. And so you have the corporate sector and the government funded sector. And I think that there is relatively poor linkage between these two. even within the academic institutions, we have segregated them into research and teaching institutions. The divisions between corporate and private R&D are also large, and we have a very poor understanding of how to integrate these their activities without
A right kind of connection, maybe the
right
connecting,
kind of
connecting
connection
with all the
while maintaining their separate mandates,
Okay.
because you don't want a confusion of mandates.
What is your message to the younger generation of India today?
I think being a scientist is one of the most enjoyable ways of doing what you like and earning a living at the same time, and hopefully one has some social value also. So I would hope that if people in the younger generation are attracted to doing science, they will pursue it and they will figure out ways to doing it. It may not always translate into the most lucrative job package, but I think the
Give you
rewards
the enjoyment of
and I think the rewards in the long term are many.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really fascinating talking to you. We'll come back with another scientist next week. Be with us. Thank you for watching Scientifically Yours.